Teachers of Reddit, what student will you never forget? Teaching ESL in Taiwan, I joked with a young student and told him I was hungry. Not knowing I speak Chinese, he responded with Kai Da Bien, which translates to each tea. I was getting my middle school certification in my state. This was maybe 3-4 years ago. And my college would place us in local schools in the area to partner with an accomplished teacher and get our observation hours in. The college had a reputation of putting male teacher candidates in the roughest schools in the area. Me and my fellow male students had a theory about this. But of course we can't prove it. Anyway, my first morning there. In a very rough all-boys middle school in the worst part of the city. First period, a little boy maybe 10-11 walks into class. Looks at me and says, "What are you looking at? You Ryan Gosling looking mother?" I was utterly speechless. Lol. I can only assume that was his catch-all term for white men. Lol. I'll definitely never forget him. I teach at a prison. The first inmate I had graduate under my teaching cried when he looked at his diploma. He was the first in his entire family to graduate. It was quite the accomplishment and I was very moved. Semicolon. Edit. Thanks for all the awards. A wonderful young man who was killed in a car accident back in early June 2020. He was in his grade 11 year. Took him under my wing in grade 9. Worked on his impulsive behavior, colorful language, anger management and questionable life choices. By grade 10, he was a mentor to incoming grade 9s that had similar issues as himself. In grade 11, he was a leader here in the school. Volunteering. Joined the arts community and held down 2 after-school jobs. He shook hands every day. He'd bring me coffee. His last text to me said, "Life is beautiful, man," and he had recently told me that he wished that I was his dad. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt coming home from one of those jobs. He was killed instantly after being ejected from a car he was a passenger in. My commute to and from work every day passes by the exact spot he was killed. Miss you. Edward. Big Mike. I'm a HS science teacher in an affluent suburb. We get this transfer kid in who is about 6 feet 8. 350. Long thin Hulk Hogan mullet, not bald though, and big glasses. Mike hailed from the hollers of Kentucky. Thick southern accent. And was the most quotable kid I ever met. I hate books MR. XXXXX say me off. My grandma made me sleep on the porch because she cooked some veggies and I told her, "Dang it woman, where's the meat? I ain't never seen a pencil like this. Can I keep this and show my dad?" Talking about a regular mechanical pencil. They threw me out of Golden Coral because I ate 8 of them steaks they had. I was Ed. Next time I'm trying 4-9. And we were supposed to have a fire drill at like 1:55 or some odd time. At 1:57 he went ahead and pulled it, honest to God, thinking he would help out whoever forgot. I had a kid. 16. Total addict. Alcoholic. Meth. Pills. Heroin. Really rough childhood. Started smoking crack with his dad at 13. Stepdad committed suicide in front of him at 14. Unimaginable in between. He'd come to school high or drunk and we would send him home. Nice kid. Always respectful and just had a good soul. One day he was all sorts of messed up and I pulled him out of class. I told him that I loved him and I was worried, and if he kept this up he would more than likely be dead by 30. He freaked out and ran to the principal's office and complained that I had just told him that I loved him and cared about him. Principal said, "Well, maybe he loves you and cares about you." We kicked him out of school after we had to. He got sober. He came back to track me down. He grabbed me and started sobbing. He said when I said I loved him it was the first time an adult had said that to him, and he believed it. He has stayed sober for years. Went to college. And is doing really well as a nurse now. I'm a speech therapist, so I work with the students who have disabilities or special needs. One of my students started with me in kindergarten. Let's call him Frankie. He had autism and just a tiny bit of language. And a lot of behaviors. But something about him I absolutely loved. He walked like an old man and had a mop of blonde hair. I adored him even though a lot of the other staff classified him as a difficult kid. He had a difficult home life and unsupportive parents which made his behaviors a lot worse. But he never had them with me. As he got older, he had more outbursts and tantrums, but they would always call me over to calm him down. When COVID hit, Frankie's parents weren't able to get him onto the computer to do remote learning. And I left to work at a different school in September, so I never got to say goodbye to him. I know he's probably doing okay this year, but it breaks my heart that I can't be the one to be there for him anymore. And I just hope he understands why I am not there. I had a junior, 16 years old, in my high school science course last year peel the strip of metal off the side of a ruler and proceed to stick each end of it into an outlet and shock himself. I saw the sparks out of the corner of my eye and he jumped up and his arm was in some significant pain. He said he did it because he wanted to see what would happen. Scientific method in action, I guess. I will never forget that Dumbus. Edited to shock because he didn't actually die. Thanks for the heads up. Dance instructor. Student had one hemisphere of her brain removed as an infant and she was paralyzed on one side. She said that she wanted to dance because she wanted people to see that she wasn't ashamed of her body. After months and months she finally managed one spin around. The other instructor cried. I cried. She cried. It was incredible. At my school, we get a lot of refugees from the Middle East and South Asia. I had a student, Iraqi, talk to me about her trip over. They fled when IS was starting to take over their city. Her father stayed behind to help others get out. They got a notice that he was being held ransom a few days later. They paid the ransom. And in return were sent an image of his headless body. She was an incredibly happy, jovial young woman. I can't even imagine what kind of pain she must have went through. I heard many stories of fleeing war and strife. But that one was probably the worst for me. This kid Jay, 10 years old with a learning disability, was struggling at home, divorced, living with grandma, and at school. It was my first year teaching and he would often lash out to get attention and be purposely annoying to see if he could get a rise out of me. Pretty soon it became clear that he was just lonely and isolated, so he needed a friend. After getting to know him for a couple of weeks, I was happy to become his friend that year, and he and I became so close that he would bend over backwards trying to catch up on work just so he could hang out with me. I saw him struggle pretty heavily, even with one-on-one support, but apart from a couple of moments of crisis, he kept his nose to the grindstone and worked hard every day. This isn't a movie, so he still wasn't the best student in the class, but he made so much progress compared to the beginning of the year that every time I even thought about calling out or taking it easy, I thought G needs me, and he did. I taught sculpture and mask making at an art summer camp years back. One of the projects was drawing a creature and then carving a 3D version of it out of a block of foam to paint and decorate. All the students nailed it. Except one. A boy around 9. Didn't get it. I sat with him and went over it many times. He didn't understand the concept of 3 dimensions. Like, what would this side view look like as a top view? Type thinking. After a long while, my assistant, a woman in her late 30s, took me aside and pointed out all the indicators that the kid had fetal alcohol syndrome. I had no idea. I'll never forget his confused, blank face and my frustration at how someone couldn't think in 3D. I try to be more understanding, sympathetic and patient now. One of my students told me as a child she wanted to grow up to be a strawberry and then cried when she realized she couldn't because she was a human being. Very sweet girl. The one who told me, "You really make me think." We are friends to this day and have the best conversations. It's the highest compliment for a teacher. I'm a professor and I had a student who was a big dude. Much older than the typical college student, like maybe 40. Ex-military. And very stoic. We did a simulation exercise during class where students had to make a decision about whether to race a car or withdraw from the race. Most students go forward with the race for a variety of reasons. But what they don't know is that this situation mirrors the decision that NASA made with the Challenger launch, which obviously exploded. After the exercise, the student came up to me and started crying and said it was the most impactful exercise he's ever done, and that when I have hard days I should remember that I made a difference for him. I almost started crying myself. It was a great moment in my career. The one who threatened to kill me. In explicit detail. Who, once we got the appropriate help and resources for him, was the sweetest kid in the world and thanked me every day for not giving up on him. The one whose life I saved when I called home because they suddenly got very unwell, and it turned out he needed emergency surgery. The one who has a physical disability, and oh so proudly told me one day, "Miss Oxenfree, look, I can jump now." Dancing helped me jump, because our daily dance breaks helped her develop her gross motor skills to the point that she could figure out how to jump. Didn't happen when he was in my class, but he, 5-year, was being difficult one day, as he often was. So he wasn't allowed out to play come break time. Teacher came back into the classroom to find he'd smoothed his all over the water cooler. Both his parents were teachers. His dad worked at my school. Grim. Not a teacher, but in my 5th grade math class when my teacher called my name on the first day of school, she paused, lowered her glasses and asked, "Are you my uncle's name's son?" I said no. And she gave a huge sigh of relief and said, "Oh thank God." This was over 20 years after she had my uncle as a student. I told my dad about that later that day and he laughed and said my uncle was quite a terror in elementary school. I will never forget Michael. He came from a different country at the age of 2. It took him months to open up to me, but I was patient with him and it paid off. We had an unbreakable bond. We would do art projects together. We would play. I learned his native language so I could better communicate with him. I taught 6th grade English. Had this student who was way too smart and funny for his age. He lived right by the school and he'd stay after school some days and just chill out while I was grading papers. I liked him a lot. I kept things pretty light in the classroom. Tried to make the kids laugh when I could. One day, I started on this joke rant about the word chillax. Can I just say something about the word chillax, guys? It's a ridiculous word. I like slang. I'm all for language changing over time. But chillax doesn't solve a problem. It's the word chill, which means relax, combined with relax, which means relax, to make chillax, which also means relax. It's pointless. And this kid stands up and interrupts me with, "Whoa whoa whoa. Just chillax. MRX. I laughed pretty hard. It might not be that funny to you, but his timing, his tone, it was perfect. Especially for a kid his age. Hope he's doing well. Not a teacher, but had a teacher who will forever hold a place in my heart. I was molested from 10th 11th grade by a man my family really trusted. After everyone found out I struggled really hard. She let me eat lunch alone in her classroom for months. She let me stay after school while she worked and listened to me vent about it. She was a shoulder to cry on whenever I needed her. She even showed up to his sentencing in support of me. I'm 6 years out of high school and I just got lunch with her a while back. She was one of the people who helped shape me in my youth. She is a wife and mother to 2 boys who were pretty young at the time. And she was teaching numerous classes at the time, yet she always made time for me when I needed her. There were other teachers at that school that looked out for me after that happened, but she by far helped me the most. I really don't know where I'd be if it weren't for her. I had a student receive ICE, in-school suspension, for cheating on a test. He proceeded to sneak his phone into the bathroom, call our HR department, and file a formal complaint against me for treating him unfairly. My administration and I got a good laugh out of that one. I had a student who killed himself on Christmas Day. I still don't understand why. He was a pretty happy laid back student. Absolutely no signs Was getting a B in Calc 2. Hard class. Good grade. His grade slipped a bit at the end. From A's to B's. But no signs of anything. My sister-in-law was his desk buddy. She did not see it coming either. I wish he asked for help instead of killing himself. This huge 8th grader named Earl who wanted everyone to think he was a badass, and he did get into quite a bit of trouble. But in reality he loved math. He took a test in class one day and begged me after to let him retake it because he didn't think he did well. I graded it and he got 100%. So I called his mom to deliver the news, and you could tell it was the first positive phone call she'd ever gotten about her son. This tiny girl named Chelsea who asked so many questions in class that you could hear the collective sigh every time she raised her hand. But she never let it deter her. She was murdered when she was in her early 20s, and it killed me to read that in the paper. This lanky boy named Isaac who was always in trouble and could never stop taking. I ran into him a few years later and he was taking AP Calc. I said, "What do you have to say to me?" Kidding. Of course. And he says thank you and melted my heart. And so many more. Becca. She was brilliant. In terms of brains, personality, talent, humor. She got a Girl Scout Gold Award, like Eagle Scout for girls, and volunteered at a local school and wanted to be a pediatrician for children with special needs. She was killed in a car accident 6 weeks after graduation. A child, 10 or 11, would occasionally run around the classroom screaming "I'm an attack helicopter" and throw paper airplanes saying "attack," the kid's name, Army. Never forgot. Student here. Read all the replies as of 149 total comments. I just want to thank all the teachers who bend over backwards for us students. Especially this year. And especially because there's a ton of absolute jerks in my generation grade. I know the effort you put in for us doesn't always seem apparent. But thank you for all that you do. And for Ms. Buck. Even if you aren't on Reddit. A million thanks. You pushed me further than I had ever been prior to 7th grade. And showed me what it looked like to truly love a class and teach them well. But more importantly, you taught me acceptance of everyone who deserves it. A lesson I'm still struggling to teach myself. I'll never forget you. Nor the rest of the Dragons teachers. So thank you teachers. Thank you a million times over. The first student to pass away. He committed suicide over the summer after 10th grade. I spent the next 3 years trying to help his friends cope in healthy ways. I was extremely proud to see that group of friends pull through and graduate. I cried like a baby when they left his seat open during the graduation ceremony. On a happier note, I will also never forget my first JV volleyball team. Most of the girls had never played volleyball. So I spent a majority of the season teaching the game. After losing most of the season, the bus ride after that first win will forever be in my heart. I will also forever remember the first kids I coached in track. Teaching is both heartbreaking and extremely uplifting. I am so grateful for all that students have taught me throughout the years. The one that plagiarized a paper so badly it matched 100% to a plagiarism catching software. Didn't respond to an email where I told them they got a 0 on the assignment and how serious this was. And then had the audacity to send me a separate email asking for extra credit that had already been awarded to those that earned it. Last year, my biggest troublemaker, 13M, put his hand on my shoulder and said MRS. Post singularity. You can say the N-word. I politely declined, stating it's a word I would prefer to not use. However, my first thought was, who died and put you in charge of the N-word? Funny kid. I hope he got his academics together this year. I'm waiting for Kevin's teacher to show up. Student teacher here. Yesterday I had such a bad day with a couple of students who made it their personal mission to make my life hell. Today, my 7th graders really made my day. The lesson had barely started and they were gathering around me, being curious with lots of positive energy, and they basically just wanted to be close and talk. We had a great lesson and the vibe was just so awesome. Now I'm sitting at home in my chair with a smile on my face. I want to remember this feeling forever. After school one day we were playing with a dog which playfully bit a student. The student then proceeds to bite the dog back to everyone's surprise. My mother has 3 or 4 favorite students from when she taught nursery school. All 4 went on to be published authors or otherwise great work, including a boy who got into Duke. Put that on hold. Served 2 tours in Iraq as a Marine and is currently in graduate school. We're wondering when he'll run for office. What always hit me is that my mother could identify these kids at age 4 and she was always right. She also diagnosed autism. ADHD. Learning disabilities. Who was gay? I had a student say if cows have udders, then why don't they have hands? Matthew. I will never forget that comment for the rest of my life. Not a teacher, but I will take the chance to reverse the question. During high school my maths teacher was clearly going through a tough time. Her parents had some illness. I'm not exactly sure. She never showed it in class, but at times she stayed at home and was sometimes seen crying at school. While I never got to talk to her, we had a very good relationship. Always had a laugh during classes. I was a bit of a class clown, and she showed genuine interest in both our progress in maths as well as our general interests and life goals. Not everybody knew what was going on with her, but it occurred to our small friend group that we should at least help her by keeping her mood up during classes. During graduation she came up to us with a small chocolate medal for each and a personal handwritten letter wishing us well and thanking us for the great time and conversations. Brought so much warmth to my heart, and I probably will never forget the teacher. The 10th grade boy who told me he'd suck my toes in class. A 10-year-old student of mine from before COVID. His mother had terminal cancer and I sometimes wonder how he is. If his mother passed. He was a real handful, but he was a nice kid and didn't deserve it. I once had a student come into class with supposed tonsillitis and I told him that if that's the case, he should be home because it's hella contagious. Kid told me that it was the non-contagious version of tonsillitis and that he was fine to be in school because he would be getting surgery for it. Next parent-teacher meeting I asked his mum while kid was sitting next to her and she just shook her head and sighed heavily. Semicolon. Also the same kid who would put on a fake British accent when asked to read aloud because he wanted to use his normal voice because he lived in the UK for a year. This was 7th grade. Goose. His nickname was Gus, pronounced Goose. And he was first in my English 1 class. Gus was receiving special education services. And he had generally not experienced success in English class or school. But he was so coachable. The next year he wanted to have my English 2 class. But I only had pre-AP options. Gus requested to be placed into pre-AP, which doesn't usually have students receiving special education services. Then, Gus met 2 young ladies who took him under their wing. By the end of the year, Gus exited the special education program. That's the one and only time in my teaching career, 13 years in Texas so far, I have ever seen a student exit SP-Ed. Edit. Not quite a teacher. But I spent a spring term as a substitute paraprofessional in a 1st grade classroom. I was charged with helping 3 little boys who had some behavioral issues. I think about them all the time. They were the sweetest little guys who just needed a different approach to learning. They certainly changed my mindset on kids who act out or have tantrums. Not a teacher. In primary school I remember the language teacher in class referenced one of the students who for the quarterly exam wrote his essay with only one extremely long huge sentence taking up almost 2 entire pages. Yes, you read that right. An entire essay 2 A4 pages long. Composed with a single sentence from begging till the end. That one kid that came into our 1-hour tutoring lesson for the first time glared at me and took off his arm. Slammed it down on the table. Sat down like he didn't just unstrap an arm. That's when I noticed he had a bionic arm. When I was after school program site coordinator. 2nd grade little troublemaker. He would not listen. Run around. and hide under the ramps and stairs of the portable classrooms. One time, after he came out from under and I was walking him back to the office, he said to me, "You're like my school dad. Makes me want to write a book about it." I'll never forget that. I don't want to teach little kids, but that was nice. The one who told me their therapist said I'm childish. It is almost 20 years ago. I was teaching in primary school and my third graders had to summarize and introduce a book. There was this one student. He was always very withdrawn. So he walked up there and just held a brilliant summary of The Hobbit by Tolkien. He didn't just summarize the book, but he really got the concept of fellowship, losing friends, betrayal, etc. displayed in the book. By grade 4 he had started to read the German equivalent of Shakespeare as well as Tolstoy, and he had an immense knowledge about, well, almost everything. He once showed me a picture of his room which actually belittled our school's library. On top of this, his family had a whole dedicated library in their house. But he had a very hard time befriending people and conversing with age mates. I sometimes still wonder how he turned out after primary school.